Alien spacecraft are hiding in our oceans.
I noticed some strange underwater symmetry. I thought initially runways.
A petty officer from Guantanamo Bay sees a strange craft that could have come from this alleged underwater base.
2 other lights popped up behind it. They started vibrating.
Why in our oceans? And how could they engineer a craft that is essentially a flying submarine?
We created a set of air jets that might simulate some kind of force field or propulsion system.
22 years ago, Gulf Breeze, Florida was inundated with hundreds of UFO and USO sightings. Guess what? They're back.
This is case number 88106, Underwater Alien Bases.
We have been inundated over the past year with so many reports of USOs.
What exactly is a USO?
You've heard of unidentified flying object, UFO. USO is submerged. It's an unidentified submerged object.
I mean, I'm telling you, the email traffic has been huge. Finally, here we are on the Royal Indulgence. We are sailing into Gulf Breeze, a hotspot of USO activity.
A lot of people have seen objects here, but it's not just here. It's also throughout the Gulf of Mexico and throughout the Caribbean area.
The whole Ed Walters sighting of Gulf Breeze in the late 1980s was heavily documented with photographs.
From 1987 to 1992, more than 200 UFO and USO sightings are reported in the Gulf Breeze area.
Of all places, why Gulf Breeze?
Good question. We don't know why. We surmise that maybe there's an undersea USO base.
An underwater UFO base. It's an exciting concept to think about, but how do we even begin to find evidence to support this theory? If we're starting to look for bases for these things to fly out of, it's taking it to a whole nother level that I'm not exactly comfortable with yet.
Do you admit that UFOs exist?
No, not yet.
Do you admit there's a possibility of UFOs?
Oh,
I mean, you've
absolutely.
seen some startling photos,
I've
right?
seen some photos, I've seen some footage, and I've heard some stories that I cannot explain. However, nothing points to extraterrestrials being the explanation.
We've just uncovered the most incredible evidence. A former Marine and War Games planner has just discovered what some experts are convinced is an underwater USO base. He may well have an explanation for where all these USOs seen over Gulf Breeze are coming from.
When I was planning a war game, I came across this island that was south of Cuba. I noticed some strange underwater symmetry that was not natural.
Retired Marine Gunnery Sergeant Butch Diaz has served in Somalia and in Iraq, and his credentials are impeccable.
Okay, to the north is the main island of Cuba. To the west is the Isle of Hugh. And this off to the east of, I think it's right around 3 miles, is this feature here. It looks like 2 intersecting, to me I thought initially runways.
It is an amazing image, but it could just be a natural geologic feature, or maybe just a coral reef.
I know that coral reefs aren't formed in a straight line, much less 2 straight lines intersecting to form an X, so this is pretty compelling.
How heavily trafficked is this, by commercial traffic or sea traffic?
I would say local fishermen, and that would pretty much be it, just because it is Cuban waters.
What about naval activity in this area?
Yeah, I would say if there's any, it's probably light, and there again, it would have to be Cuban.
Butch, I mean, you've seen imagery like this from around the world, correct?
Yes.
Have you seen anything else like this anywhere else on the planet?
Not like this, no.
This is 2 lines intersecting. Have you ever seen a single line?
Single lines? Yes. As a matter of fact, to the south of this image off the map here, there's a few, but you can tell those are actually gullies up underneath the water just because they're a little more shallow, and you can tell they're actually sort of like a runoff.
Is it possible that these are just 2 gullies that happen to be intersecting?
I would say no.
Okay. Why do you say that?
It looks like these are actually raised above the subsurface floor.
Meaning they're not gullies,
No, they're not.
they're actually convex,
Elevated,
elevated
yes.
lines. How long are these lines?
Approximately 1 mile.
Wow.
Now, could you actually insert a diving team in this area without alerting the Cubans?
No, I would not. I would not try that or advise it to anyone.
So those are Cuban waters then?
Yes, they are.
I wonder what the angle is and how perfect it is on both sides.
It looks pretty straight, and it looks like the angle is a specific angle as opposed to random. If you extended this line and to the east-southeast, it's almost as though it's pointing towards Guantanamo.
It certainly is curious that that line points almost right towards Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah, that's what's bothering me. I mean, what does this mean going off in this direction? One of these underwater structures is pointing directly at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and this area is experiencing a lot of USO activity. Officially, the U.S. military isn't talking about it, but some of the rank and file are.
I don't know what I saw. I still can't explain what it was. Never seen anything like it before. I haven't seen anything like it since.
We're here in Alexandria, Virginia, and we're meeting Charles Howard, who years ago when he was stationed on the USS Thorn at Guantanamo saw a strange object under the water. You've been on the sea how long?
I've been in the Navy 19 years now.
And you've had sea duty for most of that?
I got about 12 years of sea time.
So you've seen objects in the water?
I've seen a lot of things, but I've never seen anything like that that I've seen in Guantanamo. Well, the year was 2000. We went on Liberty that night. When I was coming back from Liberty, I wanted to get back to the ship because it was late, about 2200. So I'm about 30 paces ahead of everyone. When I noticed something out the corner of my eye, it started pulsating like a soft white light.
Where was it?
It was in the water. It was about 100 yards from the pier. As it got brighter and brighter, I stopped and I looked at it. It started pulsating a little bit faster. So then 2 other lights popped up behind it, and then they started pulsating. And all 3 of them started pulsating at the same time.
About how deep were the lights?
They appeared to be just beneath the water. They started vibrating, but the water wasn't moving. And that's when I got a little bit nervous. And then I was like, hey, come here, look at this, look at this. But by the time they got there, because again, I was ahead of everybody, I point and they was gone.
The USO that Petty Officer Charles Howard saw was vibrating just beneath the surface, yet there was no sound and no wake whatsoever.
This was late when you were coming back to the ship. It was about 10 p.m.?
2200, correct.
All right, and you were on Liberty, so I imagine you were out having some fun, maybe?
In Guantanamo, there's no overnight Liberty, so there was no time for that. And besides, I'm not a drinker anyway.
So you weren't out, no beers at dinner?
I don't drink at all.
Clear-headed, completely clear-headed.
Clear.
And you weren't alone. There were other people with you.
Well, I had duty the next day, so I wanted to get back before everybody else, and I was way ahead of everybody.
But if your friends were 30 paces behind you, don't you think they would have a clear eye line to it?
Again, they was only there for maybe 15 seconds or so. I was actually telling them to hurry up to get to see it, so to make sure I wasn't crazy.
And what did they think about what you saw?
They thought I was crazy. They didn't see anything, so, you know, it was just one of those nights.
The underwater structures that retired U.S. War Games planner Butch Diaz discovered are pointing directly at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Petty Officer Charles Howard sees a USO off Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. I don't think that's a coincidence.
Unidentified submerged objects. They are exactly the same UFOs you see in the air, in the sky. They are the same, underwater.
Maximilien de Lafayette has been studying USOs for 20 years. He's written a book about USOs and extraterrestrials at sea. He believes that the sightings at Guantanamo Bay and Gulf Breeze are actually part of a much bigger picture.
The whole USO The chassis of the machine is in apparatus. And there is a kind of shield around the USO that never touched the water. You put your hand in a glass, pull it out, it's going to drip. USO don't drip because they don't touch the water. First, they don't splash. Why? Because in front of the machine, they open vacuum space. This is why they need this tunnel. This is why they are never wet.
According to Maximilian, USOs are entering the water without creating a splash, and this is accomplished by some kind of a force field or vacuum surrounding the craft, which allows it to push the water aside without actually touching it.
Why in the Caribbean? Why in the Gulf?
Based upon report, there are 12 bases for the USO. Underwater, there are tunnels, there are corridors that they connect one base to another base.
You mean under the ocean floor, there are tunnels?
Yes.
Maximilian gets his information about these underwater bases from unidentified military and NASA sources. Unfortunately, there's just no way to confirm the validity of this information.
So it's not like these UFO bases are any kind of construction, any kind of cities or a little bubble under the water. They're actually living in the hollows of the Earth.
Correct. They are interconnected from Alaska to Japan, to Finland, to England, to the Caribbean.
If this network of tunnels leads to a USO base off the coast of Cuba, this could explain the multiple sightings taking place around Gulf Breeze.
Very sophisticated channels. And don't think when you say corridor, they were built from solid structure, such as cement or metal. No, it's solid plasma. And they can move it. They can move the tunnel where they need it to place it, where they need to navigate.
Maximilian just dropped a bombshell. He says these underwater structures are plasma tunnels capable of appearing and disappearing without warning. It certainly explains why these underwater structures off the coast of Cuba aren't visible in every satellite image that's been taken.
Well, we've come up with some excellent information. We know from Butch that there's a strange underwater structure off the coast of Cuba, and we know from Max that it could be the site of some kind of USO base. Hopefully we can get close to this underwater structure and have a look.
So we've just gotten some great news. The United States government has just approved our going to Cuba to look for these underwater sites.
Oh, that's fantastic, because then we can scuba dive on the underwater structures and see what they are.
That's good. Maybe we'll actually get some real proof about what's underneath the water there. We're going to Cuba, and this is great. We're actually going to go to dive down and see this underwater structure. And I'm not sure what we're going to find, but I suspect there's going to be some conventional explanation to it.
Now, if you're going to Cuba to learn the mambo, you'll have a great time. But to dig in the Cuban USO file, no way, Jose.
Well, why not? I mean, tourists go to Cuba all the time.
You're American. You want to go there and uncover all their secrets and come back to the United States? You know who will be at the airport waiting for you to get those files from you. The Cuban will never let you have a look at their secret USO file.
When we told them, though, that we had to get to Cuba and we've gotten permission to go to Cuba, Max predicts we'll never go. We'll see who's right. We're here in South Florida today because we should have been in Cuba. We received written permission from the United States government to go to Cuba for our investigation. And we received verbal permission from the Cuban government to visit there to investigate. Until they found out we're investigating UFOs. They denied our application flat. They said, quote, no, we want no part of that, which astounds me. Because the hard part is usually getting permission from the United States. It was the Cubans learning we were investigating UFO activity and USO activity in Cuban waters. That's what shut us down.
So although we can't get into Cuba to talk to eyewitnesses there, we have 3 eyewitnesses who were residents of Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, who have an amazing UFO story to tell us.
My name is Nick Baggett.
My name is John Brummett.
My name is Eric Kendall, and I've seen 2 unexplainable objects over the skies of Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
It was 2000, and it was about 9:30 at night, probably pretty late. And as we were walking down the street to our friend's house, one of my friends observed in the sky 2 very bright lights. They actually started rotating around each other. And they did that for how long do you think?
Just a few rotations around each other, and then one shot off really fast, you know, faster than I've seen any airplane or helicopter go. And then the other one just appeared like it was getting closer to us.
What did you guys do when you saw the lights?
We all took off running.
Now, why did you take off running?
We got scared.
Yeah, scared,
we were
definitely.
terrified.
Well, how old are you guys now?
19.
And when you saw this, you were about
10, 11.
10, 11. That's pretty young, and it's been a long time. You guys absolutely sure this is what you saw?
Oh yeah,
Positive.
definitely.
Children, they have huge imaginations, and they see things they don't understand. And while this is a good story, I prefer to have more credible witnesses than some 10 and 11-year-olds. Do any of you guys think there's any possibility it could have been an airplane, a helicopter, a hot air balloon, flares,
no possibility.
Fireworks?
Definitely not. Especially living in Guantanamo, we had seen every possible, you know, aircraft that float around during the day or night.
So, what prompted you to contact us by email?
Well, we heard about Charles Howard's encounter with what he saw in Guantanamo Bay.
And all 3 of them started pulsating at the same time. They appeared to be just beneath the water.
He saw his underwater submerged. They're the same type of lights, same intensity, same shape, circular.
So you feel that maybe you saw something similar to what Charles Howard saw?
I think there's a relationship between the 2, yeah.
Here's what we know. According to a military source, there's a mysterious underwater structure pointing toward Guantanamo Bay. Maximilian believes these structures are tunnels leading to a USO base. There's a high incidence of USO activity in and around Guantanamo Bay. But what about the rest of Cuba?
Los cubanos han estado vírgenes del tema OVNI hasta el año 2000.
The Cubans are basically virgins when it comes to UFO stories. And around the year 2000, that's when the government officially kind of started telling the people. There's a kind of opening in the media, I guess, the existence of UFOs.
Carlos Hidero is a Cuban ufologist who just moved to the United States 12 months ago. Hidero has investigated hundreds of UFO and USO cases in Cuba over the past 15 years.
This map that he drew is a result of interviewing more than 200 people about UFO sightings.
En el año 95, a finales del año 95, hubo una gran oleada en la zona sur de La Habana.
In 1995, there was a huge wave of sightings near south of Havana. And we're talking about lots of different kind of people saw the same objects in the sky.
Where is the Isle of Youth on this map?
Está un poco más abajo.
It's a little south.
Apparently what we're talking about is that the Isle of Youth is off the map down here. This would coincide with what Diaz told us regarding the structures under the water. We've had a major breakthrough in talking to Cuban ufologists. They're telling us about one major UFO hotspot that just happens to be a little north of where we suspect this underwater base to be.
Este caso es una sumersión que ocurrió en el año 93.
So in this case, he's talking about a specific case that was a USO that went underwater around this point in the map that he drew. It was an object flying around 60 kilometers per hour, not very high off the ground, and it just submerged into the water.
Este se vio al oeste de La Habana.
This is a drawing that was made by a Cuban doctor east of Havana. It was an object that came out of the water, and when it came out of the water, there was a light, almost like a flame, going down the middle.
This reminds me just like the craft that Ed Walters photographed in Gulf Breeze. It's got rings around it, it's got a string of lights, and there's even something on top that was in the Walters photograph.
It's one of the most amazing stories in ufology. In 1987, Ed Walters snaps a few Polaroid pictures of a flying saucer. He takes it to the local Gulf Breeze paper, and they publish a story about it. Hundreds of witnesses come forward. Some claim they saw the same craft. Some say they saw a different craft. Some come right out and say Ed Walters is a hoaxer. Regardless, Gulf Breeze, Florida becomes the UFO and USO capital of the world.
21 years ago, late 87 through 1988, Gulf Breeze was sort of like the center of the UFO universe, and this house featured very prominently in that center.
Dr. Bruce Maccabee is a retired naval optical physicist who studied and investigated UFO cases since the 1960s. He's extensively analyzed the Ed Walters case.
Ed was sitting in his office, which was over there. He happened to notice out in the sky, in this direction, a glowing object coming along. He took his first picture, and the object had not quite cleared the tree. The left-hand side of the object was blocked by some of the branches of the tree. And then he took 4 more pictures that was in the clear, and this telephone transformer, this power transformer, and the lights there, that all shows up in the picture that he took.
I have to admit that the craft in Ed Walters' photos and the craft that was hand-drawn by one of the witnesses in Cuba, they look a lot alike. Both have a basic acorn shape, lights surrounding them, and both have a light that appears to be coming from the bottom of the craft. This acorn shape is very similar to what was seen in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania in 1965.
As time went on, over the next few weeks, he had sightings which he didn't tell anybody about. But other people had sightings as well, and they did publicize in the newspaper. Ed, over the years, he was called all sorts of bad names, shall we say, by the debunkers, and basically told that he was a big hoaxer.
Ed Walters believed in his case, and he never let the skeptics get the best of him. He wrote a book about the whole ordeal where he says, "I'm an average family man. The debunkers describe me as not prominent or outstanding in any perceptible way. When I passed 2 lie detector tests, when I passed 8 hours of psychological tests that proved my sanity, they said nothing. The overwhelming events that rocked my family and our small town will not be hidden away by a few debunkers. Questions will be asked, and the answers will one day be discovered. Who are they and what do they want?"
On what basis did people claim that Ed Walters' story might be a hoax?
You have to understand that virtually any photo could be faked. With a Model 600 Polaroid camera, you press the button and the film comes shooting right out, right? Well, we found out that it is possible to double expose that, but we had to call up the Polaroid people to find out how to do it. And the guy said, you have to stop the motor. Now, Ed took his first picture with that, his first UFO picture with that camera, the day after he bought it. Are we supposed to assume that Ed knew more about it than the Polaroid guy did?
A double exposure involves taking a frame of film and exposing it not only to the original image, but also to a second image. The outcome is the images in the picture appear as if they're together in the photo, when in reality they were captured at 2 separate times, but on the same piece of film. A lot of UFO hoaxers use this double exposure technique to make it seem like they've taken a photograph of a genuine UFO.
But the first photo was the one that said, you can't just pass this off completely as double exposed hoax. Because the first one shows the tree blocking part of this object. And you can't do that in a simple double exposure. You could do it with a so-called masked double exposure, where you make a mask that blocks out the background light. But it'd be impossible to do that with one of these handheld cameras. You have to get very accurate registration between, say, the edge of the tree and where the edge of the object is being blocked by the tree.
In the mythology of the Gulf Breeze sightings, it was only Ed Walters that saw the craft, only Ed Walters that took the pictures. So in reality, there were a whole bunch of witnesses before Ed Walters, before he even saw the craft, and a whole bunch of witnesses concurrent with Ed Walters while he was seeing the craft on repeated occasions.
There were a dozen other people who said they saw exactly the same thing. Several hundred people who saw something that could have been related. And so you have to ask yourself, does it make any sense to say Ed Walters' photos were a hoax, but everybody else's sightings were real?
Do you think this could possibly be a hoax?
No.
This is only the tip of the iceberg. There are hundreds of UFO and USO sightings here in Gulf Breeze. There could be something in the water, something out there in the ocean that they could be attracted to.
My heart was racing. I didn't know if I was going to collide with the object. It was not anything I've saw in 30 years.
In November of 2007, Captain Keith Broussard is sailing his small boat from Panama City to Gulf Breeze, Florida, when suddenly a green, glowing, unidentified submerged object appears right under his boat. And what happens next terrifies him.
It was about 3 a.m. in the morning, and I was about 100 miles south of here, and I was sailing all night to try to get back to Mobile Bay. And what had happened was my depth sounder started triggering off, and I was in about 1,300 feet of water, and my depth sounder showed 12 feet of water. And I knew something was under the boat, but I didn't know what it was. When I looked over the side of the boat, the water was glowing green. I looked around the sky, and there was this light behind me that looked like a star, but it was really bright. I took a navigation head, and when I went to go look back, it swung around to the front of the boat. And when it swung around to the front of the boat, the object that was under me came out of the water and took off into the sky.
Can you describe exactly what you saw in the water?
Well, I thought it might have been a submarine, but, you know, because it was cylindrical. But it wasn't a submarine because there was no lights on it or anything, and all it did was it made the water around it glow a green glow.
Multiple witnesses seeing USOs report a green glow underneath their boats, but this glow could just be bioluminescence. Bioluminescence is a chemical reaction in the water that produces light. In fact, 90% of marine life produces bioluminescence.
And describe for me the interaction it had with the water.
I guess you'd say the water domed in front, and then it broke out of the water.
An object underwater larger than Captain Keith's boat exiting the water quickly should have generated a pressure wave of such magnitude that it could easily swamp the boat. We've got to find out what made that object exit the water so smoothly that it didn't broach Captain Keith's sailboat.
Captain Keith's testimony gels with Petty Officer Howard's and the testimony of a lot of other witnesses who say that they see craft enter and exit the water without making a splash. Now, how is this possible?
So what was going through your mind while this was going on?
I was petrified. I didn't know what it was going to do. I was 100 miles offshore. I was in a radio dead zone. There was no way I could communicate back to shore if anything was going to happen.
How long does this trip typically take?
It's a 3-day trip.
And do you stop for sleep, or do you drive right through?
I'll usually lash the helm and catch a few hours sleep.
So we could speculate that perhaps you were just very tired, you were up for a long time, and maybe your eyes were playing tricks on you from lack of sleep.
I'm used to sailing the boat like that, and I do get well rested before I'll sail the boat.
It seems to me that Keith really believes what he saw, and if he did, this could be a really incredible encounter. But we have to keep in mind that this is a man that's been on the sea for days alone with only a few hours sleep. And scientifically speaking, that can result in hallucinations. So if he did see something, I'm not thoroughly convinced that what he saw is actually a USO.
I reported it over at the marina where I was at Pirates Cove.
Mm-hmm. And what'd they say?
They sat there and they said, "Oh, it happened to you too." They've told me that you'll run into some strange things out there. And like I said, I've sailing 30 years, that's been the strangest I've seen.
The green glow that Captain Keith reports seeing sounds similar to what some local shark fishermen are seeing just off the coast of Gulf Breeze.
Sometimes when we're out in the ocean, we'll see lights in the water. There'll be circles, probably about 10 feet deep, green colored and glowing looking.
We're here right on the shore of the Gulf of Mexico because some shark fishermen out here in Gulf Breeze contacted us, and they said they see lights in the water at night when they're out there at night shark fishing.
All right, basically what we do is we'll kayak all this bait out for shark fishing about 500-600 yards, And when you get out there, there's not the lights from the hotels or anything like that. It's a lot quieter. You can see things in the sky and the water that you wouldn't be able to see at all here. You can actually see straight down.
My name is Marcus May, and I see UFOs and USOs while I'm shark fishing.
In the water, you can see these kind of greenish orbs.
Do they ever move?
No, it's just there, and it's glowing.
So how would we get out there if we wanted to see these lights tonight?
We would go on a kayak.
Can you take Pat out?
Absolutely, yeah.
What are you talking about?
You should go out there, take a look for yourself, see the lights, see what's under the water.
You can catch some sharks while you're at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of sharks out there.
Right, well, we're catching them all, so you won't have to worry about it.
Are they big sharks? Is there anything that I would have to, be concerned about?
About 250 pounds is about the heaviest we've caught. Unless you fall in, I think you'll be safe.
Don't fall in.
Okay, great. Have there been shark attacks in the area?
Absolutely. There's a shark attack every year, it seems, down here.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind as we're paddling out there.
While I'm honored that Bill and Kevin have so much faith in my abilities to do this, they're not the ones going out there into these shark-infested waters. If I should tip over, it could be a pretty ugly scene.
Okay, let's go do this. Great.
You got it, man.
Remember, don't fall out.
He's already looking a little wobbly, if you ask me. He got slammed by a big old wave. But I don't hear any screaming.
Can you see anything in the water?
When I put my paddles in the water and stir the water, you do get some of the bioluminescence, but it takes a lot to create it.
Pat is able to cause the lights themselves just by violently pushing his oar through the water. This is bioluminescence. That's what he's seeing out there, a chemical reaction caused by an organism. And the result of this chemical reaction is an emission of light. This is a very good explanation to what all the fishermen are seeing themselves.
We've dropped the bait. There are, Marcus says there are sharks around us at this time. I'm seeing shadows under the boat, but I'm not getting a clear view of anything. We don't have any moonlight tonight, so the water's really, really dark. The shore seems really far away. If I got into trouble out here, it looks like it would be a long paddle back. This would be a bad spot to have trouble in.
How stable is it out there? Can you keep the thing steady?
The kayak is rocking a little bit, but it's not bad. Hang on, I think I just felt something bump my kayak. The kayak is rocking a little bit, but it's not bad. Hang on, I think I just felt something bump my kayak. Marcus did tell me that sharks have been known to bump boats, bump people out of kayaks.
This is a pretty dangerous situation. The shark bumps hard enough, he's going to fall in the water, and there are going to be sharks around.
Is whatever bumped your kayak still bumping the kayak?
I'm not hanging around long enough to find out. I'm just going to keep moving.
There he is! Hey, you did it!
Wait, Marcus, where's Pat? I don't see Pat.
Was Pat behind you?
Yeah. I don't see Pat.
Okay, Pat, Marcus is back. We're looking for you.
So we think we see Pat coming ashore in his kayak, but it turns out it's not Pat. It's Marcus. So I'm beginning to get a little worried. We don't know where he is, the currents are strong, and he's not talking to us on the walkie-talkies.
I see Pat on the left.
See Pat?
Nice, yeah, a little bit. I almost tipped over because the swell picked up out there, some high winds.
So you got bumped by a shark. Was that scary?
That was the scariest moment for me, knowing that we just dropped the bait, lots of chum.
There are sharks everywhere.
It was intense, but while I was out there, by digging my paddle into the water, I managed to recreate the green glow caused by bioluminescence. So maybe the green glow that people are reporting is just bioluminescence.
It was so dark out there we couldn't see each other, really.
So when you move your paddle under the boat, along the bottom, you saw bioluminescence.
Yeah, but he says it's totally different from what he's seeing.
From
the
the
balls.
orb, it would be more like this size,
Right.
and it looks like it's about 10 feet down.
Oh, really? You're seeing something really big?
Marcus says that bioluminescence is not what he saw. He saw green glowing spheres, or orbs, and bioluminescence does not explain what Captain Keith and other witnesses saw. Objects going in and out of the water and not making a splash.
Looking out across the sound, I saw a triangular shape with red lights. And then all of a sudden, it went into the water. I did not hear a splash or see a splash.
It went straight into the East Bay, and it did not make a splash.
One thing that really fascinates me is that some of these USOs go into the water and come out of the water without making a splash. And I'm really curious, is there any kind of technology, is there a shape or design of a craft that can actually do that?
I've also heard that we have supersonic craft that create a field around them so that there is less of a fluid drag around the craft. Maybe USOs use something like that.
What I would do is ask an aerospace engineer, is there an experiment you can build where you generate a kind of a wave around an object and then insert that into water and see what happens with the water? I would investigate that. We're here at Flowmetrics, and we're talking to Steve Harrington, who's an aerospace engineer. And we're trying to work up experiments that will show how to minimize the splash of a flying disc entering the water to mimic the effect of a USO.
USOs are entering the water without creating a splash. This is what witnesses are telling us. That's what Maximilian told us as well.
You put your hand in a glass, you pull it out, it's going to drip. USO don't drip because they don't touch the water.
And hopefully you can help us figure out how that's possible.
When things go in the water really fast, they tend to create a little column of air behind whatever goes in the water, and then when the water comes back in, that tends to jet out a splash. But if you put enough bubbles in the water, then you kind of change the density of the water in the neighborhood of the object, so the water is more compressible. Then when it comes back together, there won't be such a sharp peak of pressure that creates a splash. We created a set of air jets that might simulate some kind of force field or propulsion system that pushes the water out of the way as the USO enters the water. The other thing that we're going to try here today is a hydrophilic coating. It's a coating that attracts water. Things like wax are hydrophobic coatings, so right after you wash your car, all the water beads up on it. That's a hydrophobic coating.
Bottom line is that a hydrophilic coating will create less of a splash effect and more of a smooth effect around the object than a hydrophobic coating, which will reject the water and create a splash effect.
Right, exactly.
We're actually filming each of these USO dives on a 300 frame per second video camera. And we can do frame by frame analysis and see pretty precisely how high these splashes really are.
Well, let's launch it and see if we get any witnesses.
3, 2, 1. Okay, well, our first test here is going to be a control.
Aerospace engineer Steve Harrington has made a model of a USO, and we're experimenting with different ways to reduce the splash of the craft as it plunges into the water.
3, 2, 1.
Whoa, that was a lot bigger than I expected.
That was a splash.
That was a splash, all right.
I'm very surprised that an object this small creates such a big splash. Every USO report that we've received describes a large object entering the water without a splash.
They appear to be just beneath the water. They started vibrating, but the water wasn't moving.
We think we have an idea of how this is possible.
So here we have a hose with compressed air going into a tank that we saw before, and then we have all the little nozzles out front where the air is going to be jetting out. Okay, air pressure on.
Oh, that's a great sound.
3, 2, 1. Give it a yank.
That reduced the splash.
It did?
It did reduce the splash.
You say with water on your face?
Not exactly. Didn't seem much different from the first one, to tell you the truth.
Okay. We need to focus in on the primary splash, and unfortunately this is happening so quickly that we really can't see it with the naked eye. Is there a change? I don't know yet. We're going to have to wait until we see video footage. We've painted the USO with hydrophilic coating, and hopefully that'll create a smaller splash. 3, 2, 1.
I really saw a splash, an entry splash, but it was that secondary splash, the final one, that's making a big
That's the one that
difference.
makes us all wet, isn't
Yeah.
it?
They never touch the water because in front of the machine they open a vacuum space, and there is a kind of shield belt around the USO.
If we're talking about can something enter the water without a splash at all, I think it would probably have to be a different shape.
Unless the object itself was enclosed in a visually invisible to the light spectrum wave, and it's the wave that's changing shape.
Both Bill and Maximilian have an interesting theory about USOs, where they create some sort of force field that surrounds them that prevents a splash from being made when they enter the water. Well, we don't have the technology to test something like that. I'd like to focus on what we did test. I think we should analyze the high-speed video.
Okay, so let's look at this control frame first. And what we're looking for is we want to kind of count how many squares it went up.
Let me see.
Just the primary splash, though, not the secondary one.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, the splash, when it's pretty thick, okay, and it's not a whole bunch of individual little droplets you would never see unless you're right there. Okay, it's only going up about 2 squares.
Now, squares, is that a scientific measurement?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, good. 2 or 3 squares.
So let's look at the air pressure one we did. So this one looks like about 3 squares. Okay, so it's not much different than the first one. So now let's look at the hydrophilic one. Once again, it's going up 2 or 3 squares.
Top of the 4th.
Wow, it's going up even higher, isn't it? Yeah, so that didn't help at all. Made it worse.
It's kind of ironic that all the changes that we made in an attempt to minimize the splash on our model USO actually made the splashes bigger. It's obvious that we don't currently possess a technology to make a splashless craft.
Well, could this just mean that we're not even close to understanding how USOs work? Maybe they're of course they're not using air bubbles or
Of course not.
or slippery hydrophilic substances, right?
Right.
I mean,
Well, Maximilian told us that, didn't he?
Right.
I mean, Maximilian said that the flying saucer or the UFO never even touches the water. It's all the wave itself, which is why you don't see splashes. Clearly, what we're dealing with is not a conventional technology. We're light years away from figuring out what this is.
It's not surprising to me that we couldn't design a craft that doesn't make a splash here in the lab. I mean, if we're to believe that these USOs are from a highly advanced civilization, they would have the technology to do this. And we simply don't.
Clearly, Gulf Breeze, Florida is a hotspot for UFO and USO activity and has been for the past 22 years. A lot of these craft appear to be coming from the Gulf of Mexico just above Cuba. According to a former U.S. military war games planner, there appears to be an underwater runway. It's very possible these UFOs and USOs are coming up from this underwater base, flying over Cuba, diving into the Gulf, and flying over Gulf Breeze, Florida. The evidence is corroborated. There is so much of our ocean that is still unexplored, and that's where the truth lies.